Hi, Medical Wildcats. I'm Joseph Guggenheim. I'm a 1972 alum of the medical school, and today I'm doing a spooky presentation for Halloween on anatomy at Northwestern, past and present. The first part of the talk will be on body procurement, how cadavers were obtained for centuries. The second part will be on the history of anatomy teaching at Northwestern from the time the school began in 1859 until the present time. And the third part will be on, if you'll pardon the term, cutting edge technology regarding cadavers and their future. Dissection of cadavers began in about the 4th century BC. Hippocrates is considered the father of modern medicine, and he gave guidelines for dissection. Aristotle coined the term anatomy. The first dissection of a cadaver was probably done by Herophilus and Erystratus in Alexandria, Egypt, in the 3rd century BC. They used a cadaver, and it's thought they probably used a criminal. And because of the taboo against desecrating bodies, human cadavers were not used for education again until about the 14th century. Human dissection was considered blasphemous, and physicians could only rely on the repeating work of so-called experts. The picture on the right shows Galen lecturing in Rome, and he is lecturing on human anatomy based on the dissection of a monkey at the base of his left hand. Europeans valued the sanctity of the church more than the quest for scientific knowledge at the time. In 1319, there was the first recorded incident of body snatching by 4 medical students, and they were arrested for grave robbing. In the 14th century, dissection of human cadavers was revived after a hiatus of almost 1,700 years. In Italy, in Bologna, Italy, students of Master Alberto, who was a lecturer, were prosecuted for grave robbing and bringing the corpse to Alberto's house for dissection. In the 14th century, as I said, was the first use of human cadavers for education for almost 1,700 years. And the dissections were often done in public. You can see in the picture on the right the way the demonstration was done. A senior faculty member, known as the lector, sat in a chair and read from the works of another anatomist, in this case, Italian physician Mondino de Luzzi, who was credited with the first human dissection in Western Europe. These dissections were often public and viewed by non-medical personnel. A junior academician, known as the ostensor, pointed out the structures below the lector, and a barber or surgeon, known as the sector, actually did the cutting. In the 15th century, executed criminals became the source of bodies. There were a few executions in Italy, but it didn't matter because dissection was not overwhelmingly popular. But as the demand increased, local hospitals became the source of cadavers, using poor foreigners and the relatives of families who could not pay for their deceased relatives' funerals. In the 16th century, grave robbing became more common. Students would remove bodies awaiting burial or even attack funeral processions. Dissections were performed on hanged criminals. So by the onset of the 17th century, the demand for bodies for cadavers had increased sharply. In 1752, in Great Britain, Parliament had passed the Murder Act, which legalized dissection of executed murderers. And the government increased the number of crimes punishable by hanging, which also increased the number of cadavers available, but the supply still remained inadequate. This led to the beginning of resurrectionists. These were people who exhumed bodies from graveyards and sold them to medical schools. In the 17th and 18th century, many European countries passed laws to allow dissection of paupers, prisoners, and patients from psychiatric and charity hospitals. In 1745, the first course in anatomy in a U.S. medical school began at the University of Pennsylvania. The picture on the right shows some first-year students dissecting cadaver at Penn. They were probably 19th century based on the clothing and not 1745. Freshly buried bodies were sought for dissection. Tavern owners, professional thieves, and medical school employees themselves were perpetrators. And the societal injustice was obvious. There was a disproportionate number of African Americans, prisoners, and poor who were used as cadavers. In 1788, a riot broke out in New York. Students and anatomists had been digging up bodies for years, and the public turned a blind eye to this practice because most of the victims were poor or African American. But when it was discovered that a white woman's body had been removed from the Trinity Church graveyard, men stormed the medical school. Many medical students and faculty were jailed and beaten, and the state militia had to intervene, and somewhere between 6 and 20 people were killed. The following year, in 1789, New York passed a law against grave robbing, but this did little to curtail the practice. Body snatching by funeral directors and owners of institutions housing the poor and those with mental incapacities continued. And the widespread use of unclaimed bodies was driven by the beliefs, by the public that these subjects were giving something back to society that looked after them during their lifetimes. Two Irishmen, William Hare and William Burke, ran a boarding house, and they sold the deceased residents to medical schools. They realized there was potential profit in this, so they began what was known as burking. They would get their victims intoxicated and then asphyxiate them, as shown in the picture on the right. Burke was found guilty of this, and he was hanged and then dissected. Hanging followed by dissection was considered the ultimate punishment. Londoners John Bishop and Thomas Williams did the same method, allegedly killing somewhere between 500 and 1,000 victims, and they were known as the London Burkers. Both Bishop and Williams were hanged and dissected. The Warburton Act in Great Britain in 1832 allowed the use of unclaimed bodies for anatomic dissection if they were unclaimed after 48 hours. But it also allowed for voluntary body donations, so grave robbing was no longer profitable. The wealthy and elite considered body donation admirable and felt it was necessary for progress in science. But the poor felt differently. They thought dissection, which previously had made dissection punishment for a crime, was now being used as punishment for being poor. Let's fast forward to the 20th century. The Uniform Anatomic Gift Act in the United States standardized and streamlined the donation of bodies. The International Federation of Association of Anatomists, the IFAA, in the 21st century in 2012 recommended that only donated bodies be used for teaching and research, and recommended the discontinuation using unclaimed bodies and executed criminals. There's an excellent article that was published in a peer-reviewed journal in 2018 on the source of bodies for cadavers around the world. The authors wrote to medical schools in every country that had one to find out their source of cadavers. And they found that about 1/3 used only donated bodies. These were mostly the high-income countries: Canada, Great Britain, Australia, South Korea, and Japan, but also some with lower income, such as Chile and Nicaragua and Thailand. 1/3 used only unclaimed bodies. These were most of the African countries and the Arab Gulf states. And the remaining 1/3 used a combination of donated bodies and unclaimed bodies. And this includes the United States and South Africa. So approximately 2/3 of the countries at the time, which was only 4 years ago when the study was published, still used unclaimed bodies either partially or exclusively. So why, with the IFAA recommendations as using body donation as a gold standard, do some countries still use unclaimed bodies? Perhaps it's the trust in the local communities. Black Africans and African Americans are less likely to donate because they feel they have been victimized and their bodies have been used disproportionately in the past. Perhaps there are economic reasons. Most of the high-income countries use donated bodies, whereas the low-income countries use unclaimed bodies. But this is not completely true. The United States is a high-income country, and we still use, partially use unclaimed bodies. Perhaps it is a religious thing, but most major religions support the altruistic act of body donation. The Buddhist countries, Thailand, Japan, Sri Lanka, rely exclusively on body donations. India uses both donated and unclaimed bodies, but the donated bodies are mostly those of the Hindu faith. And the Islamic Gulf Arab states have no donation programs. Well, let's look at the history of anatomy at Northwestern. The picture on the left is from 1892, and the one on the right is from the mid-1960s. Dissection has always been a course at the medical school from its beginning in 1859 to its the time it was the Chicago Medical College, and then until became Northwestern and up to the current date. It followed the University of Michigan's practice of not starting dissection until cold weather to minimize the odor. Dissection was usually carried on at night between 7 and 10 p.m. under dim gas lights until the new building at Dearborn was occupied. And this shows the third building. The last picture was the fourth building. The dissection room in this third building on Prairie Avenue was built in 1878. And the room was cooled by tons of ice and double walls of logs, which became moldy. So between the odor of the logs and the odor of the cadavers, some students began to use tobacco in order to tolerate the odor. The fourth building of our school was on Dearborn, opened in 1893. At first, the floor of the anatomy lab was on one of the upper floors, and the floor was made out of asphalt. The cadaver crypts would sink into the asphalt in the summer when it became soft. The chemistry lab was below the anatomy lab, and the chemistry professor complained that there were drippings from the anatomy lab into his lab. So the anatomy lab was moved to the basement, and it was a refrigerated lab. This was considered state of the art, and it attracted visitors from afar to see this miracle of medical education. The Ward building, that was the beginning of our fifth campus. It was opened in 1926, and 4 women were admitted after not having been admitted since 1870. 4 women, 4 people were the number in an anatomic dissecting team. And it was considered improper for men and women to dissect together. This policy continued until 1963, when 9 women were admitted. The current anatomy curriculum is mostly prosection based instead of dissection. Approximately 120 students each year at the beginning of the year, first-year students, sign up to be dissectors to do dissecting, but the number drops off as the year goes on. So cadaver dissection is optional, but the majority of the students, at least at the beginning, do choose to do dissection. The lab itself occupies the entire footprint of the basement of the Terry building, which was built in 1991. And the picture on the right shows the current facility. Students spend a variable amount of time on each body region, up to 15 hours. The curriculum is now organized by body system, and it consists of modules such as the thorax region or the renal system. 2 years are required to get through the entire body system, and the anatomy is integrated with other subjects regarding that body part, such as physiology and pathology. There are summer courses for the residents in surgery, OB, and ENT. Previously, cadavers were embalmed with equal parts formaldehyde, which is toxic, glycerin, and water. but now the formaldehyde has been minimized, so the solution consists of 13% phenol, 5% or less formaldehyde, 25% glycerin, and the remainder water. Air is tested frequently to comply with OSHA standards. All the cadavers at Northwestern are now donated. There are some who do not qualify for donations, such as those who have had an autopsy, those who have had hepatitis or other communicable diseases, and those who weigh more than 300 pounds. At the end of the second year, the students hold a memorial service to honor those who have donated their bodies for the study of anatomy. Families and relatives are invited, and the picture on the right is the 2014 program of the memorial service. So what's new in anatomy education? Other programs have been developed to either augment or replace cadavers, and these include haptics, holography, virtual reality, and plastinates. Haptics involves the simultaneous use of the senses of touch and sight. This picture is from the publication put out by Northwestern University, although the picture itself is from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. You can see the students are feeling the structure with their non-dominant hand and drawing the structure with their dominant hand. The developers of this called it mark making because some people claim they could not draw. The developers claim everybody can draw, but they called it mark making. Since it involves two senses, sight and touch, it is supposed to improve observational skills and cognitive memorization and attention to detail. Holograms have been developed in a partnership between Microsoft and Cleveland Clinic and Case Western Reserve. Cadavers and medical illustrations have been used for over 100 years in U.S. med schools. But now with holograms, students allegedly can learn in minutes what used to take hours to learn. They can also learn remotely. They do not need to be in the anatomy lab. They can see in 3 dimensions. And the headset on the viewer on the left is a self-contained computer that allows the users to see holograms and their surroundings. This allows body parts to be separated, and you can see the intact model followed by the muscular system, and then the vascular system, and then the skeleton. Structures can be opened and can be viewed from any direction. A beating heart can be visualized. The heart can be opened to study its beating in action without actually doing any cutting. Nearby structures are not damaged in exposing whatever the student wants to view. And for education, the structures can be labeled. Virtual reality is one of the new developments, and like the holograms, the body systems can be separated. You can see in the picture on the right the viewing screen, which is life size, like a cadaver would be. Like the holograms, the image can be rotated and translated to visualize various structures. Pathology can be seen when programmed into the system. Practice quizzes are available for students' review. So in addition to the full-size screen, there are tablet screens for review. And the so-called cadaver can be visualized in either 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions on the full-size or the tablet screen. Plastinates are a way of making permanent cadavers. The cadavers are reusable. However, they are expensive to manufacture. They require perpetual consent from the donor, but there are no toxic embalming fluids. Plastinates can be used to preserve body parts or the entire body. This system was developed by Gunther von Hagens in Heidelberg, Germany, and it involves the replacement of body fluids and lipids with plastics. The body is flushed with embalming fluid, followed by flushing with acetone. The body or body part is then placed in a vacuum, and the acetone evaporates and is replaced by plastic. The body or the body part can then be positioned as desired, and the plastic is cured. So what is the future of cadaver dissection? Will students continue to use cadavers for education in the future? Well, cadavers have several disadvantages. They are expensive. They are not reusable. Mistakes made while dissecting can interfere with the future dissection. The supply fluctuates. Sometimes there's an excess, sometimes there's a shortage. There are environmental regulations because of the embalming fluid. The structures appear flat and lack the normal color. And it's time consuming. Is the time spent dissecting actually worthwhile? But on the other hand, students often consider cadaver dissection a rite of passage when they begin medical school. This is their first patient. Students learn empathy and respect for the human body, and they are prepared for the stress of death and dying. It allows them to visualize in 3 dimensions what the structures look like. Is dissection the most powerful means of learning anatomy, or will these other methods replace or simply augment anatomy education? Only time will tell. I recommend this 17-page article from another peer-reviewed journal on the history of dissection. It is an excellent history from ancient Greece to the current times. I'd like to give special thanks to those who have helped with the preparation of this talk. Dr. Larry Kokard was the director of the anatomy lab coming to Northwestern in 1982. After he retired, Dr. Angelique Duenas took over as director, and Ms. Katie Latal, the special collections librarian at the Galter Library, is always a valuable source of history and illustrations. Well, I wish everybody a happy Halloween, and let's get together virtually again in December for my special holiday season presentation. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and let's stay connected.